Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Carrot Cast. This time we've got a live episode of Behind the Deal. If you're listening to the podcast, make sure to tune in to carrot.com/deal every other Thursday where we do live streaming. Come and do a Q&A with us and check out the Mindset episodes, the Trevor Truck Talks every Thursday with Trevor. I'm your host, Brady, stepping in for Trevor Mock. Well, he's out right now. And I've got Robert Grand and Ricky Grand, Carrot customers, here with us. And we're going to be breaking down the Trail of Tears apartment deal. Real quick, before we dive in, it's going to be good. Just want to say a quick thank you to our sponsor for this episode, our friends over at Investor Fuse. If you're an investor, wholesaler, flipper, and you're looking for a CRM, if you're doing deals consistently and you're struggling with follow-up and you're looking for ways to automate your follow-up and make it easier, go check out investorfuse.com. It's an awesome CRM. Anyways, I'm going to welcome back Robert and Ricky to Behind the Deal. Welcome, guys. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you, Brady. Thanks for having us on.
Thanks, Brady. Always appreciate it.
Yeah. How things going in Eugene, right down the road here?
We're doing good, man. We're staying busy. We've got projects going, more on the horizon, and just trying to, we're in June, so we want to finish out the rest of our second half of this year strong. Which, we're heading that way quickly. So
that's awesome.
Trying to keep the machine going, man.
For context, anybody watching and listening, we had, let's see, you guys first stumbled into Carrot's ecosystem. What was it? Carrot Camp, probably 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, I think it was like 2018 is when we first got a Carrot site, when we were just trying to figure out how to be investors. That was the year that we were like, we're going to do that. And I was listening to the Carrot Cast back then. I was like, okay, well, at least I know now I need to have a Carrot site. That'll be the first start. And Ricky was kind of holding the brokerage together for us while we made this transition into the investment world. And we were previously, real estate brokers, but we wanted to be real estate investors. And so we've kind of, over the last few years been making that switch to real estate investing more than brokerage sales. But so it's kind of been that thing. And that Carrot site was kind of the pivotal thing. And our first purchase came from a Carrot site. I think it was just an organic lead that came in or something, or maybe one of the pay-per-click leads or something. But it was, back in 2018, 2019. And then we did that deal and been going ever since. So.
That's awesome. What's revenue look like for you guys from 2018? Just to give people context for you started out as an agent, you're like, hey, maybe we should try this investing, flipping, wholesaling thing. How have things changed since 2018?
Yeah, brokerage-wise, I mean, we were doing like 40, 50 transactions a year, probably just under 500,000, is probably, wouldn't you say that's correct, Ricky?
I think it was around that. Yeah, around 4. We've grown it, 75 to 100% over the last few years, each year. So, and then this last year just crossed the 7-figure mark on revenue. So, pretty steady growth, to be honest.
That's awesome. Congrats to you guys. What kind of projects are you guys doing right now? Is it, because I know you guys do a lot of Airbnbs, a lot of residential fix and flips. Mm-hmm. Are you starting to get more into commercial?
Yeah. So that's part of the Trail of Tears. Your first jump into commercial. But we started out just doing single family home flips, and that's still our bread and butter, what we do. We like to do gut job rehabs and make them really, really nice. And we just kind of caught on to the Airbnb thing. Like, if we can make something really nice and do kind of the higher level like we like, because we're not willing to sacrifice quality in the products that we build. So if we can do that, then we can Airbnb them out or eventually sell them down the road if we don't want to do that anymore. But right now we're really onto the Airbnb concept in our area. And they're kind of the main reason for that is, in Oregon, the landlord tenant laws are really favoring the tenants versus the landlords. And including the city of Eugene, where I live, they're talking about more rental regulations in place on landlords, and so we're like, we don't want to have a bunch of single family homes where we have to deal with these headaches and stuff with a lot of different tenants and things. So the Airbnb thing works out great for us with that. So we can have some really nice quality homes in the downtown area and kind of south area and university area. And then we realized, we didn't want to have anything less than probably a fourplex if we're going to have people in it, if we're going to deal with more stringent rental laws. So that was kind of the push to going to the apartments. And we, got that. And then we just bought our own office is another section, slice of commercial real estate that we're going to do. So we're going to cut our teeth on rehabbing our own office space and get that going in the next, get it done hopefully in the next 6 months. And we got permits ready to go on that. We're just lining up the work and everything.
That's awesome.
And to add to that real quick, Brady, we also do, wholesaling and even wholetailing on the investment side. So we kind of run that whole, the whole broad spectrum, of being a hybrid agent / investor. And ironically, Carrot Camp, I met Moho Matt, shout out to him, who was telling me that I was, not dumb, but we shouldn't be just leaving our mobile home and park leads. And I just locked up a wholesale deal on a mobile home and a park. Not making a ton of money, but it was a good experience, and I know more about what to look for, man. So it's just another component to our company. So
that's awesome.
No leads left behind.
Yes, no leads left behind.
There's been 3 kind of pivotal things recently, for us, like, speaking of, coming to the Carrot Camp, the mobile home thing that we learned from there, that made us money, that covered the cost of Carrot Camp. There was another thing. We were just talking about how to refinance Airbnb rentals. And somebody mentioned to us, I think it was Raven mentioned to us about it being a hotel loan, this and that. That's why you struggle kind of, in the off market area, trying to get those things to be refinanced. So we learned that from her, and that's another great connection we have. And we're going to put one of our other Airbnbs through that process with, her company to be able to get that refied out. So, and there was one other thing, I can't quite remember what it was, but every time, like in the last month since we've been there, I was like, this is the 3rd thing now, that has helped us from Carrot Camp that totally covers the cost of going to it, when you build those connections with people and they just give you that insight to something. So.
So many nuggets.
Yeah.
It was a good group this last time. Yeah, anybody watching this, if you don't already follow, if you're on Instagram, go follow Robert and Ricky. What's your Instagram handle?
Mine's just Robert Grand.
Robert Grand. I commented on there this morning. What I love about you guys is, I don't know, a lot of investors, you can either treat flips one of 2 ways. You can, you can put lipstick on a pig, quick and dirty, try to, milk it, make as much money as possible, or you can go, the opposite side of the coin, and you can, break the budget and lose your tail, or there's a compromise in the middle. I feel like you guys do a really good job of like beautifying a house, making it just really an experience and nice, and adding value to the neighborhood. I love what you guys are doing with flips. They're really nice.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So tell us about, we're going to break down, guys, pop in your questions if you have any. We're going to break down the marketing, the negotiation, kind of every dynamic of this Trail of Tears apartment deal. You guys can learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
Hopefully the podcast doesn't turn into a Trail of Tears.
So it's got a happy ending.
Yeah.
Before we jump into the marketing of it and the negotiation, what is this? Why was this a cluster? And this is your venture into commercial? What's going on here?
Yeah. So, I mean, how we got that lead was actually through another wholesaler. So a place out, I think, out of Portland, and then we jumped on it because we saw it was like we made a great purchase on the thing that we'll talk about. But
he emailed you.
Yeah, we were on a wholesalers list. We're on a bunch of different wholesalers lists too. We wholesale, and we're all part of those lists. And so that's how we got that one specifically. And Ricky's probably involved a little bit more in that portion of it. You want to take it from there?
Yeah. So Robert sent that to me and was like, check this thing out. Like, it seems too good to be true, and which normally is the case. And there were some times I felt like that through this process, but he sent it to me, and I think he kind of got it late or something. We only had a little bit of time. We basically had 24 hours to really like hammer this thing out to see if it worked before we had to go and see the thing. And there were other investors going to be there. And so I basically shut down everything else and spent like the next day and a half, like, frantically going over this thing and trying to figure it out and going, the numbers were too good, where I was like, something's wrong. This thing, I'm missing something. I sent it to a mentor of mine. I go, what do you think? I go, I feel like I'm missing something. And he was like, I don't think you are. I sent it to our private, to one of our hard money lenders. I was like, what do you think? Would you fund this? And again, even they were like, no, I think you found a dime in the rough. I think maybe these people didn't quite understand what they had. And, it seems like a solid deal. We back you. And so we actually locked this thing up before the walkthrough because we didn't want to risk getting into a bidding war. So we gave them a little bit more money than they were asking.
And this
is
a multifamily unit?
Yeah. 17 units.
Yes.
17
16 units. And we converted one laundry unit to a 17. So we made it into 17. They were
Yeah.
asking 6 for it. I think we ended up paying like 625 or something like that. I'd have to look at the numbers, but we offered a little bit more. And then we got the deal in contract the day before the walkthrough, and Robert went to the walkthrough essentially, casual, like he was, there for the walkthrough. And
that's
then at
true.
the end, everybody left. He handed the $10,000 earnest money check
Yeah.
to the guys, and we were in contract. And I want to point out, this was smack dab in the middle. COVID just happened. Everybody like businesses were shutting down. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And I remember Robert and I talking. We're like, this is either going to be like, a huge win and or it's going to break us. Like, but we're taking a chance on it because fortunes can be won and lost in this type of situation. So when everybody was like pulling back and canceling contracts, here we are diving into this, this deal that is, over $500,000 of purchase price with the potential, to be, very valuable. And
what's the potential ARV on it? Sorry to kind of
no, we actually had an appraisal done, which we'll kind of end up getting to that point. Okay. But it appraised at a finished value of $2.5 million. So,
ooh,
yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Good. Yeah.
Holy cow.
So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of getting to the deal. We closed June 3rd, 2020 on this thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's when the Trail of Tears began.
That's when it started.
That's right in the middle of COVID. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, we weren't thinking COVID would last as long, right? And we didn't think that, like they'd be having rent restrictions or, eviction restrictions and things like that. And on the property.
You and everyone else. Oh, it'll be over in a couple months.
Yeah. It's like we thought it was going to be done. No big deal. And, so that kind of started the path of pain or the Trail of Tears with it, like going down, like, and it wasn't really like bad in the beginning, and it's still not, horrible now. Like, it's just a lot of learning, and that's kind of what came out of it. And the first thing that we hit when we went to go apply for permits was a flood zone issue. Like it didn't pull up through escrow or anything as having a flood zone. And the reason why is because just the very front, one of the front of the buildings on both sides, kind of like a horseshoe complex, only had, the tips of them in the flood zone. So that didn't seem like a big deal. Apparently, they didn't require us to have flood insurance or anything like that, but it was a big deal for the city, so the city, with them, and when you do flood zone stuff, it falls under FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, deals with all the flood stuff. And so that right there kind of caused things to escalate, where if we, if our repair costs were more than 50% of the value of the buildings, then we had to bring it up to current flood zone standards. Now, these buildings were built in the 1940s. And so part of that flood zone standard would be raising it up out of the flood zone, like 2 or 3 feet, which is just impossible, to like do on these old buildings.
Oh yeah.
And
it's possible. I watched a video on it last week. It's extremely expensive and very special. But it's not
totally
reasonable. So they said it would cost you 50% of the value. Is that based on what you bought it for, or the appraised value of the $2.5 million?
No. That's what's really great about this is, so we had to go through a long ways to get to that, $2.5 million, to be able to be used as a number. So they like base the local town that we're in, they base it off of what the county tax records are. But in Oregon, county tax records are really out of date because they don't go up with the sale of the property. They go, they were locked back in 1997 or 98 or somewhere back then, and they can only raise 3% per year. So the property tax values, the real market values, are really off, in county records. And so they were trying to use that. And so when I say, we couldn't raise, the construction cost couldn't be more than 50% of the value. So say like the building's worth, 500,000, I could only spend, 250,000 before I had to bring it all up to current flood zone standards. And so that is kind of, and that's just like, like a federal law through FEMA, like you just have to do that if you do that. Well, like, and it was really interesting in the beginning. We just thought it was just for the front 2 buildings, the front 2 apartments that were in that area. And so we went through this whole long process of applying through this whole, FEMA flood zone thing with the city and filling out their applications and doing that to just try to break off those front two buildings. I wouldn't say like structurally break them off, but just kind of break them out of the total construction costs of the buildings.
Yeah.
And so we're going to just deal with that later. We had permits on the rest of it, kind of in place, and we started construction, on some of the stuff. And the next thing that we got to, which was pretty epic, is all the electrical. It was old, but it had like newer meters, and they just kind of patched it all together. Everybody had their own individually metered thing, but they were all in series. So if we pulled an electrical meter from, say, unit 29, unit 30, 31, 32 would all lose electricity, and there was no way that they could prevent that. So we could only, so we learned a valuable lesson there, So then we were like, well, what are we going to do? And trying to figure this out. And then we finally because we're trying to work on the apartments with people there. We just wanted to go in and rehab a unit when somebody wasn't living in it, completely gut it, back to the studs, rebuild it, and then put it back on the market, and get it rented again. That was kind of our strategy over 2 years. Well, when that came up, we're kind of like, well, what are we going to do now? So the next thing that we came up with after that is we need to get rid of all the people, inside of the apartments. So that way we can fix up the apartments, so we could do it, in chunks, but, not have to worry about somebody losing power and dealing with all that type of stuff. And that's where the COVID stuff comes in, right? So as we walk further down this trail, we, at that time, I think so we bought it in June. We determined that in like October, because it took a few months to get permits and stuff with the city. So then we got to that point, and then we realized we can't evict the people. We can, if they want to leave, all this stuff. And
how many of these were full? I'm curious, like how many units were filled, and then what was the condition of the whole place like?
Four units were vacant. So those were the first 4 that we were going to start with, and those were the 4 that Robert got permits for. And that's when we uncovered the problem, because it's 3 buildings, and 2 on the one building, the smaller building that we were going to start with, were vacant. And that's how we found this problem, because we were going to cut off the electricity for the other ones. And then we found out the rest of the building was, the other 2 buildings were tied up exactly the same way. We had 12 people living in it, 4 vacant ones, and then we were converting one. So technically 5 we could work on. And then we had some people, there was just a couple of people not paying rent. So not the end of the world. The others were paying. They were all in really bad shape. And the property itself, needed a ton of work, but they were fine with living there. And we were going to, keep working on it and improve this thing. And then once we had to try to get these people out, it was like mayhem. Everybody but one person stopped paying rent.
Yeah.
So we were just hemorrhaging
they all
money
just quit.
Point. Yeah, everybody was like,
well,
we're not going to pay rent. One guy didn't pay rent for 14 months. Another person, we just ended up getting everyone. Eventually, after a long period of time, got everyone out of the apartments with an attorney, because we need to renovate them and jump through all these hoops to make it happen. But it was just this long, drawn out process. To even get to that point. Let
me interject right there, Ricky. So we went from like that October, time frame to the January time frame, where the state of Oregon actually changed their rules a little bit, which gave us a window to get rid of the people. We were able to go, and they said if you're doing major renovations, to your building, then you can go forward with the eviction of people. We had to pay them each a month's rent, even if they hadn't been paying us or anything. We still had to pay them a month's rent.
That's awesome.
We were like, can't we just deduct it from what they owe us? And they're like,
good logic.
Nope, you got to pay them a month's rent. So Ricky went through and systematically paid every single person a month's rent, and they still wouldn't leave, and we had to end up getting, did it ever get to the point where we had to use the sheriff to get them out?
No, we hired an attorney. Attorney handled all of the paperwork, got everyone. Either half of them, well, actually more than half, didn't even show up to court. They just got a default judgment to get them out. And but they were already basically they had realized they milked it to the end and just up and left at the end of it. And then there was a few that kind of stuck around and were trying to reason and stay and saying, hey, we'll pay our rent. But I'm like, at that point, we had we couldn't do anything, so it just didn't make any sense. So the attorney worked with them and said, hey, we'll give you X days so that you can make this transition. And so we ended up negotiating with them Oh, it
Yeah,
sucked.
and we didn't want to. We wanted to keep the people in there because second we got rid of, said that to people, all of our cash flow from that thing went away, and it just became a black hole for money.
Yeah.
And we did not want that to happen.
Yeah.
But it gets even better. Like it gets like so. We think last June, after we got them all out, it's like June-ish. So I have everything resubmitted to the city. This is how we're going to work on it. I came up with a plan with the city, and everybody and the planner. And then when I was actually in Hawaii with Ricky, we were in Hawaii, and I get this call, and the planner tells me, yeah, she goes, I don't know who told you could do this plan the way that you're doing it, and blah, 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 and going through the whole process. But yeah, how you submitted everything and how we did it, is completely wrong. And I was
What?
like, yeah. And so in that process is there's three buildings, right? And so we're individually doing each building and looking at each building because there's 7 over here, 6 over here, 4 over here, and so we were like, okay, we'll break them all up. And then they told us they wanted individual flood zone applications for each one of those. And so as we were walking through, we realized like that's what the game plan was. And speaking with them, that seemed like what the game plan was. Well, during that process, we were doing that, and I submit everything, and I think that we're good. And I'm thinking, like in Hawaii, like it's going to be great when we get back. We're going to start construction, and get these things all cleaned up. It'll no longer, we'll do it in phases so we can add renters back in over time. But then I get that phone call, and she says, I don't know who told you to do this, and this. And so I go back to my email as she's on the phone with me, and I go, you're the one that told me to do it this way. You told me.
That was going to be my
was like-
question. Is there a paper trail or, oh man.
Yeah, I had everything. Like we categorize everything. We don't delete anything. I was like, you're the one that said
That's
this was the
awkward.
plan. You're the one that did this and this and this. So then to finish, she said that because the front 2, apartments touch the flood zone, she said that now all of the apartments in that area have to be in the flood zone. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, this is like, I go, well, you can't, I go, then we have to rechange the valuation, how you're valuing things, and it can't be off county tax records. And they had no other way. But I'd done some research inside the FEMA documents. Like I've read them like 200 times, and they're the most boring things ever. And there's like multiple ways you can do it. One of them, which was an appraisal, having a certified appraiser go through and figure out, what's the actual value of this. And then the city can accept that. But then like a couple after I had that really annoying conversation with her, 5 days later, I think I'm still in Hawaii. Or maybe it was right around the same time. Or maybe that same day, she tells me, well, a LOMA, a letter of modification, has been submitted from such and such subdivision or near your apartments. And the LOMA now, as effectively as of like June 26th, now puts your whole apartment complex into the flood zone regardless.
What?
I'm like, so now I have to deal with the whole thing, right? It's like, so now it's like, it doesn't even matter because that was, and they didn't know that. They just found out about that change. And so it was just like fatal blow, and then we're like, okay, well, what are we gonna, now we have to just work this long process. And so I like mentally checked out from it for like 2 months. I was like, I'm just going to let it sit and figure like this stuff out. During that process, the planner, I actually was going to planning commission, and at the end of that 2 months, I was like, I did sermon that I was going to go to the planning commission in town and, ask for a variance. And I spent previously in a town neighboring to that 4 years as a planning commissioner. I'm like, I know how to get a variance, and I can do this and this and this. I go, it's going to be people like me that were on the board, so they would be like, yeah, this is crazy. You're being held to the standard.
What's the variance?
It
Is that
doesn't
just
really
an
fit.
exception to?
What's that?
But what is the variance? Is that just asking for an
Yeah,
exception?
to give an exception for that apartment complex due to the age and time frame when it was built, and not be held to the flood zone standard that the city adopted. So they can choose on a case by case basis to kind of eliminate that and be like, no, this doesn't actually make sense for here. I mean, they were built in the 1940s. We're in 2020, and it's never had a flooding issue in that area. And so it's just because the river's across the street, it could flood at some time, but it never has. It's a super deep channel right there. And even during like the heaviest flood season we had, the water was barely touching the road in that area. So it wasn't like it was potentially, it could flood, but it hasn't in like 80 years, in that area. So, but it gets even better. So I'm going back and forth with this lady, and everything's just like a no, no, no. And she's changing her answers all the time. And I just can't figure it out. So I talked to her boss at Public Works. I'm like, there's just something's not right here. Like I can't quite get the right answers out of her. I don't know what it is. The assistant planner was amazing. He was a great guy, but even like he ends up quitting and like leaving the city because he can't work with this planner. Well, then I get a call like one day and he tells me, he goes, I'm back at the city of Cottage Grove. I'm like, oh, okay, great. That's awesome. He's like, yeah, the head planner got fired. She was drinking at work and doing all sorts of weird things and making crazy decisions. I'm like sitting there thinking, I go, yeah, like the crazy decisions that were made over the last year where one thing would be one thing and then the next day and she didn't remember saying that. And I have to prove it to her in an email that she said that. I go, those type of crazy decisions, you know? And he's like, yeah, pretty much, you know? So
interject, this is why you document everything. Your conversations, if you have the conversation on the phone, you send a follow-up email to outline the conversation, just to recap, this is what we covered this. I want to make sure we're on the same page, you know, and get a response if you can, get them to agree. Then you have it in writing, right? That's always step number one with these things. And this isn't just us. I mean, you know, Robert's working with the engineer who, you know, knows his side of things. Did you consult the, you know, the attorney we work with at all, or is this? I know Robert did a ton of reading and research, but you know, you find other resources too.
I'm a flood zone savant, you know, when it comes down to like what can happen and not inside based off of FEMA documentation and like how it can be. And our savior was getting a new person in there and then having the new person say, yeah, you're pointing out in the FEMA flood zone documents that we can use one of 5 ways to value your building. He's like, I'm good with you guys choosing which way you want to do that. And he's like, we need housing in Cottage or in this area. We need housing down there. I don't want to say the city name. So we need housing. So he goes, let's just try to figure this out. And that's when things like started changing, you know, kind of with it. And it still has been a really long process, right? Like, so we agreed that we would go and get the appraisal, which was how much, Ricky? $6,000?
Yeah, it was like $5,600 to get the appraisal, but we knew the value and, you know, and it came in right around what I think that my analysis put me at like 2.35 or something is what I figured, and we ended up getting 2.48. So
that's pretty good. That's pretty good to be able to ballpark it like that. That's impressive.
Not bad.
Dang. Yeah. So are you guys? Are you going through this? You mentioned your attorney at one point. Like, I'm thinking like, what makes you have the guts to say, yeah, I want to take on this deal? Because it feels like maybe you're going into it a little bit blind. I mean, blind as far as commercial or multifamily investments. This is something new. So like, are you talking to your attorney at points during this? Like, what are you doing when you got these big questions?
Yeah, I mean, anytime, you know, you do have big questions, definitely in the commercial world that we've learned, having a good real estate attorney or just a good attorney in general. With that one, it was more just processes, you know, like following the processes, understanding, learning what the process is, how to fall within it. I think, you know, it was valuable that I spent 4 years as a planning commissioner. So I understood the city side of things, you know, I can understand the investment side of things, and Ricky with the numbers. It was just super helpful. But yeah, we went into it completely blind, you know, but we kind of believe in the philosophy that, you know, to fail forward and fail fast. And I think that's, you know, we wanted to jump into that space, and then we're like, if a deal pops up, we're going to do it and figure it out. And a lot of people wouldn't do that, you know, but big risk, you know, equals big reward. And if you can, you know, stomach doing that. And I remember thinking at multiple points, like, this is the most expensive thing that we ever bought. I've never, you know, I think our previous rehab was like a $200,000 house, and now we're going to try to jump into this 17-unit apartment complex and like figure this out. And you know, it would have been good to do a little bit more research on like the flood zone aspect of it, and notice, you know, if I would have checked the maps myself, I would have noticed the tips of the building were in the flood zone, and that could have caused us to maybe get the place for a little bit cheaper because of that, you know, and dealing with that, you know, if we would have kind of recognized it.
Yeah.
But, you know,
go ahead.
I don't know, I was saying, but, you know, it's looking back, you kind of think, okay, I should have done this, this, and this, but we learned so much. Now we feel like we can tackle like even a small new construction apartment build, you know, like I would feel comfortable, you know, we're still in the process of this, but like I understand enough to like walk through things and go through a process, you know, with the city and stuff, kind of to figure out like how to get something done, you know, which is really cool. And, you know, catching up to where we're at now. So the new guy at the city is great to work with, but it still took a long time for the appraisal. So now I think we're like October, November, we're out of money, on our rehab that we had before, because we put some money into stuff. We're out of payments built in, so we've got to make a few payments ourselves, which were like what, $5,000 payments, Ricky?
Yeah, on that one, on the first loan, we didn't have any payments built in, so we were paying.
Oh, we were paying it. That's right.
We were paying $5,000 a month to have this property as we're renovating it, and but it was like the cash flow from the tenants actually like covered the mortgage, and they were way below market rent. So this is like grossly undervalued in terms of the market rent. So, but it was enough as long as people paid. But then it was like new owners, it was like 30% of them stopped paying, and then once we had to get everyone else out, they all immediately stopped paying, and then that's when the nightmare really began. But so now we're eating $5,000 a month on top of not getting and lost rent, and the time it took, where we the opportunity cost, I guess, or just not being able to get this thing up and running. I would estimate that over the course of the last 2 years, this thing has cost us probably an additional $150,000 than it would have had everything been streamlined and smooth and not having to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
So,
you went into it with cash flow. It's different than going into a wholesale deal. It's like you went into it knowing like, okay, we can stomach this much. This is how much we can afford to lose. It is a big risk, but at the same point, it sounds like a pretty calculated risk. It's like,
the value was there, so it was totally worth doing. And we knew, okay, even if we were wrong on certain areas, the spread was big enough that we could be wrong and still feel comfortable and be happy with it. It was just a matter of, and looking, if we ran into problems, we knew that we would find a way to get things done. We have enough resources, enough people in our network that we could find a way to kind of overcome some of those obstacles. So going into it blind is one thing, but not having the network, people around you that you can ask for support or find people to help you is another thing, right? Like, we're leaning on our experience of previous projects, my experience in the investment world and the finance world, Robert's in planning and contracting. So it's not like we just went into this and we're like, oh, 17 units. Yeah, let's go do it. We have experience and to back us, and it's just taking an iteration or next step in the process of our growth as a company and saying, here's a first opportunity. It just happened to be one that we had some struggles and dealt with them, but we've learned a ton from it. So the value was there, and it was totally worth it regardless.
That's awesome. Where are you guys at with it right now? Are you just rehabbing right now?
So we just now got permits to be able to rehab one of the first part is the 4 units, and we're breaking them up into buildings like we originally wanted to do. Now it's way easier to work with. It still took a long time, from like we redid our loan and got a bigger rehab budget in January. We pulled the trigger on that. And then it still has taken till June just to get all the permitting and stuff done. And that's, I think, the thing that I just didn't account for, or we didn't account for, is just dealing with all the little intricacies that you have to deal with on a project that big. When cities are involved, when it has an extra issue of a flood zone, is time. You just got to be able to recognize it could, best case scenario and worst case scenario. And I think we're in like the worst case scenario, but we're kind of seeing the end in light, the light in the end, the end in light, the light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah, so we just got approved, to start going ahead to do work on our 4 units, and then we're good to go from this point forward, and we'll be rocking and rolling, as long as we don't have any major delays. The latest thing that's taken forever is we've got to put the power underground because it had drop lines to the buildings, and so with that level of renovation, so we got to get the power under the ground. And I was back in like February meeting with the power company, and they're like, well, when do you want to get this done? I'm like, tomorrow. Like, I would like this done tomorrow. And I'm still like waiting on the power company to get that done, And so, excuse me, I got a little bit of like allergies right now, but trying to get that done with them and work through that whole process with them has been kind of, a total pain. But it's just not a single family home. And that's, I think, the thing that we kind of were just banking on. I was like, yeah, we've done single family homes. Like, you need new power, you want it underground, this and that. That's no problem. It is a problem, when you're thinking on it's 17 units, the transformer size has to be bigger now, and all these different things that go into it.
So it sounds like just setting the expectation, knowing like, okay, this is commercial, it's going to take literally 2 to 3 times longer than decisions. When you're talking about planning, decisions going to take twice as long to get approved. Getting an electrician, commercial electrician, twice as long. Power company, twice as long.
And nobody wants to move as fast as you. Like nobody else cares, right?
It's not your money, it's not their money.
They only care when you bug them enough via email and phone calls. That's when they're finally like, oh God, let's get these guys off our backs. Let's, you have to stay on top of it. You can't sit and wait for people. And we made that mistake plenty of times where we're like, oh, they're working on it. Okay. Let's leave them alone. And then 2 weeks later, we're like, how is this not done? Like you only had to do X, Y, Z. And then, we reach out and find out they hadn't even started it. And we're like, hey, we really need this done. And then we keep poking and prodding, then they, a few days later have it done. So the more you stay on top of them, the faster your project will go too. So
I've noticed that. I'm building my house right now. My wife and I are building our house, and it's like, it took us a little bit to learn that too. And I'm more of the type of like, I don't want to bug anyone. I don't want to bother anyone. Like I'm just, I trust them. They'll get to it. And it's like, we learned like, okay, exactly what you said. You got to bug the crap out of them. There's just not another way. Contractors, like generally speaking, a lot of them are really good at what they do, but the smaller ones or smaller teams, they don't have the bandwidth or systems or process to be following up, and not always super organized. So it's a lot of times whoever calls the most. And it's have you found any other ways to, like, any other tricks for speeding things up, whether it's like planning approval or getting contractors? Any shortcuts you've learned through this?
Or just a really good question. I think it's put. I put on my calendar, like use Google Tasks, like every Monday morning, it's a reminder that pops up, call Eric at such and such city, head planner, see what the next steps are. And so like, I always ask, that's one of the things I ask in email. I'm like, we're here at this point in this project. I go, what are the next steps to move forward with you? And that's a very direct question. And if they don't respond back within 2 days, then I'm on the telephone, like, hey, I sent you an email. I need to know the next steps to keep progressing down the road. And once I started putting that on a follow-up system, kind of like you would with like a lead, hey, let's keep moving. You're going to sell, that really kind of transformed it. So it's like bugging them is kind of one thing when you don't know what you're trying to ask them, but just asking in a way that has to provoke an answer, like, hey, or then they'll respond back, it's very common, like, hey, we're processing everything on our end, and the next step is for me and, the head of, whatever the permit services to sit down and figure out what the permitting is, this and that. So then my response back, that would be like, great, what would be a reasonable time frame to have that done? I will follow back up with you. And so like, then I would put in my tasks, like that person, would be the next task, so just a bunch of reoccurring, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday tasks that would pop up and on my thing to keep myself organized and following up with these people. Cause there's just a lot of moving parts, and dealing with it. And that has been the most successful thing for me.
And on the purchase side of things, like we had to move very quickly on this, but we saw it as a good deal. So I wouldn't have normally wanted to move that fast. And even once getting into contract, we were under the gun in terms of timing because this was a wholesale deal. And then you add in that it's our first venture into something like this. If it's going to be your first venture in, build in a longer closing time so that you can do more thorough due diligence. We had done our due diligence, but we could have done better. We could have been more thorough. We could have, if we had more time, we could have called the planners and talked to them more and said, hey, what are some of the problems that you foresee or potentially foresee coming?
Yeah.
We could have probably found out about the power situation or the flood zone. And we could have either said, hey, we need more time so that we can start tackling this and figure out our plan of attack for once we close, or we need a discount, so then you can you kind of go back and set your own, expectations with the sellers or wholesalers so that you aren't just, clock ticking, dollars are going out the door. So I think that, going back, I would have loved to have had, 90 days so that I could have dug into this thing, a deep dive, and asked through questions and then talk to power and figure out and say, well, how long does that, realistically take to do? And if they would have told us 3 months, then, okay, now we know, to plan accordingly. We could have just had a little bit more opportunity to plan and prepare and, whether or not we change things and just, be able to set ourselves up for success. Whereas we were like went in gunslinging and we pulled it off, but I don't advise everyone to just go in that way. We, more time would have been
yeah.
awesome.
So obviously you would have done it differently. You would have asked for more time. What I'm curious about is, in my experience, it's like if you bring a plumber to come look at a house, they're only going to point out the things that are wrong with the plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
If you bring an electrician, they're going to tell you, hey, you might want to consider this with your electricity, even if the framing is falling apart. You know what I mean? And so it's like with a project of this size, like, would you have brought in more people? And like, when you do another one, how many people are you going to bring in? Who are you going to consult to make sure you catch all of those downfalls?
Yeah, every single trade. I mean, we general our own stuff, so that was my fault as a contractor. That was a life lesson right there, is allowing somebody, to pressure you to make the move too fast. They probably didn't think of it as being a big deal. We didn't think of it as being a big deal. We saw it as a huge opportunity, and it's still a huge opportunity. But that's why they have due diligence in the commercial world, and it's why commercial projects take so long. And that whole process of, you'll see something, it looks like it was sold, but then it closes 5 months later, because they're going through all those things to try to make it fit the parameters of what they want to do with the building. But yeah, I mean, I would have had our starting from the top. We'd have probably been working a little bit closer with our attorney, in the beginning. We would have definitely had our designer, just like we would do in a rehab. We might have an appointment with our designer, take a look at it. What structural concerns do you see? Same thing with the engineer, going through. Then we go through electrical, we go through plumbing with those pros to foresee any of the major issues. And then spending more time on the city side, again, having them look at the property. And we have a good relationship now in this place with that planner. And we do in our area of Eugene too. So we can make those calls now, but we know what questions to ask that we didn't know what to ask before, where we just thought it was a simple rehab, and when you're looking at things on that commercial level, it's a completely different game.
So are you calling, like, when you're bringing the trades through, are you calling plumbing inspector for the city of Eugene? Or are you calling a plumber and say, hey, can I pay you an hour for two? What are you doing?
Yeah, all of our people that work with us, they would show up to any project for free. Most of them will. Just getting their insights, like, do you see, asking them, like, what obstacles do you see here? Like, what's it going to take? We got this thing back to the studs. What do you see, going on here? And for a great example, originally the sewer went around the outside of the building, and from the front doors of the house, the sewer ran out kind of in a horseshoe pattern. Well, talking afterwards, once we got going on this thing, talking to the plumber, he goes, you've got this big open courtyard area. He goes, your sewer line should just come right up and then just branch out to each of the units, kind of like a tree. And he goes, that will save you a lot of time. And then people won't be driving over the sewer line under, on top of gravel and stuff like that. So you won't have to deal with that. The same thing with the electrician, getting the meter packs on one corner of the building, versus having them spread out everywhere. Like right now, like next to every door, there's a meter, and he's like, nowadays they like to put all the meters at the end of the buildings, and have everything close there. And so that way, when the electric company comes in, they look at everything. And so those are things that we just didn't know, and we just had those conversations to figure it all out. But it would have been good to know and have that pre-planning time to be able to walk through with everybody and do it. And commercial is a place where we want to go anyways, but this one experience has kind of given us that insight, to be able to ask, and including the city inspectors. When you talk to an inspector, a lot of them, a lot of people know with rehabs, they're not, that cut and dry for cities. They have a house, you want to modify a circuit, that's one thing, that's an easy permit. When you have an old house and you want to gut it back to the studs and rebuild all the infrastructure, they have a harder time looking at that. They're like, oh, okay, well, you've got X, Y, and Z. It's all new electrical. It's all new plumbing, and they get through it, but it's just not as cut and dry as saying, like, I'm going to remodel or rehab. And we do a lot of studs up, rehabs, which you've seen. And so those kind of give you that. And that's what this was. And so this town only has about 15,000 people in it. So they don't really have the capacity to understand what we're really trying to do there. It's not their fault. It's just they don't have a lot of people doing it. So we're like the first ones to come in and hit this flood zone ordinance that they put back into, or they put in effect back in like 2014, thinking that it seemed like a good deal, and it all made sense. And and parts of it were good, but then parts of it were bad, like how they were assessing buildings and stuff like that. So it was a good learning lesson with them. And then, the inspector aspect of it, we met with the inspector after we'd already purchased it, and he's like, okay, he's like, wow, man, this is going to be an extensive rehab, this and that. And he's like, you're going to try to bring it up to code as best you can. And then you build that relationship to start, letting them know that we're not there to just try to skim coat and patch this thing up. We're there to rebuild it and make it really nice, so there's quality rental housing, in the area. And when they kind of get that and they get to know you, then things kind of loosened up. But we had to learn all that after we had purchased it, so it was costing us, money every month to learn these lessons. And that's where, that's why I call it the Trail of Tears, because like every time I think we're moving forward, we move backwards, and I would just want to cry, and be like, oh my God, is this thing still going? And then Ricky and I have talked multiple times, like, should we just sell this thing to somebody else that has the experience to get this thing done? Like, should we just lose our money, walk away, And then, but the thing we'd always kept in mind was the end goal or the result, looking at the upside, would I be okay with another person, if we sold it, we'd make probably, I think our net would be like close to $1 million that we would exchange, which we could exchange it into a lot bigger complex. That's a huge amount of money, that we could get out of this thing. And if we just gave that up because we were afraid and didn't want to keep going and walking through the path and, oh, it's too hard and we can't solve all these problems, I think I would have regretted it forever, and so that's what's always just kind of kept me like going. And I'm sure, Ricky can chime into that too.
That would have been my biggest regret, man, is turning away from it. That's one thing my brother and I have always prided ourselves on, is our perseverance and our determination. I literally was talking to my wife about it, something else, and she's like, I don't know how you do it. And I was like, well, I go, it's about, your mental stamina. And I go, I have the mental stamina of a Viking. So, I was like, there's no way that we're going to quit. We're going to quit on this thing. I was like, it's going to be an amazing story when we're done to be able to share with people. And at the same time, it's still going to be a big win for us. So, we had those conversations. There were moments of doubt, but in the end, we're committed. We're like, no way, we can't. We're doing it. Let's figure it out. Let's move forward. Let's revamp things one way or another. It's going to get done. And Robert's right. I mean, this thing, we're going to, when we sell it, it's going to be worth 2.5 million. We're going to be in it total with, rehab budgets and everything will probably be, around 1.3, 1.4, and then, minus real estate fees and stuff like that. It'll be, a net win of $1 million that we'll roll into another project. And hopefully it goes from a 17 unit to a 70 unit. That's our plan with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, if you had quit, if you hadn't persevered through it, you wouldn't have learned anything, and you probably would have jumped into the next project facing some of the same struggles, being like, more likely to give up again because you didn't figure it out.
Winners lose more than losers lose. So
that's so true.
You got to take it on the chin a little bit, and keep going and figure things out. It's it's not all cupcakes and rainbows and easy, but once you get that experience that you can leverage, then it gets easier as you do more, and you got to start somewhere.
Yeah. And we all want to talk about the wins, right? You don't want to talk about the struggles and stuff. You want to be like, yeah, and I made $200,000 on this flip, or I've done that. It's like, we're still in the middle of this thing. It's not over yet. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more struggle along the thing. We're just now, getting ready to gut some stuff and start rehabbing and going to work on it. And so we're not there, but it feels like, because it's taken so long to get to this point, it feels like, that we're kind of like there. But now the real work begins, to get this thing done. And I love that you say that, winners fail more than losers fail, or however you said that. That was a very good point.
Yeah. So. Winners lose more than losers lose, or, vice versa, either way you say it.
You fail forward, and that's what it's all about. And I'd love to tell you about all the amazing projects we have. That's why when you text us about it, you're like, hey, you want to consider this? And I go, yeah, you want to hear about the Trail of Tears, because I was finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. When you said that, I was like, here's a great story, like to talk about and like what, where it could go. And so, because you hear just so many, stories where people are just so successful, but everybody that's successful has gone through something like this. They've had to get there, and through hard work and failing.
Yeah. Especially for the new people starting out, man. Like, it's so important to understand that it's not all easy, right? It takes work, it takes time. Are there easy, aspects? Yes, and it gets easier, but there's trials and tribulations and hard work and even some sleepless nights as you're trying to grow your company or do some of this stuff. So It's not like you just walk in and start hitting home runs and you start making all this money. It takes work.
Yeah.
So we want to share these stories.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. I appreciate the perspective. I agree. I think it's super important to highlight I wouldn't call this a failure in the end because it's going to be a big win in the end, but we have to give context and say like, this is what it's actually like. This is real estate.
Yeah.
It's not always just checks. Yeah. Well, let's wrap it up here. I can't wait to have you guys on again in the future once this thing gets rehabbed. Anything you want people to know on this deal, or any last words you want people to realize if they're looking at, going into their first multifamily or commercial project? Any words of advice?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's just don't be pressured by somebody that wants you to make the deal happen. I mean, sometimes you lose. This one worked out, but it could have easily went the other way. Like if we had been paying $1 million for it and we had to do this, the numbers would be a lot tighter. But the upside on this one was huge. But often wholesalers and stuff like that haven't done, especially if they're trying to sell you an apartment building or commercial property, they haven't done the due diligence at the level that's probably needed to be done. And so those ones, you can't let people push you, to make that buy. And even if there's other people looking at it, you can't be pushed into that space without having some information. This it's working out now, but it could have easily went the other way, so.
Which is,
my advice is that nobody cares like you do is the first thing, right? So those guys, everybody is trying to make money, and nobody, not some people, but people aren't maybe trying to take advantage of you, but they're just trying to get the deal done. So that's where the pressure comes in, and make sure you have time to do your analysis, crunch your numbers, consult with people that you trust who will give it to you straight and will give you actual, hey, I think that's a bad idea. And a mentor of mine told me I'll pass on a good deal before I take a bad deal. So sometimes we pass on good deals just because of, we have to close and you have to sign today and we're going to close in 7 days. I'm like, that's not my style. So we're going to pass on it and we'll look for another one. So be prepared to walk away if it doesn't make sense. If you're being pressured and stuff like that.
That's good. I think it's the same advice to the wholesaler as well. Whether you're the wholesaler in this situation or whether you're in your guys' shoes, the buyer looking to flip this, it's like if they had taken their time and not felt pressured to get under contract, they could have done more research on it and potentially had a bigger spread and have a even better plan. So it's interesting, both sides. It's awesome. Anyways, I appreciate it, you guys. We're out of time. We're going to wrap it up. Everybody watching, thanks for tuning in. Catch us live. We'll actually be, we won't be on here next time. We'll be out at a team retreat.
Sweet. Awesome. Have fun with that.
Yeah, a month from now, catch us at carrot.com/deal. If you're listening to the podcast, make sure to subscribe, follow us on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. We greatly appreciate it. It helps us spread the word about the podcast. But until next time, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you later.
See ya.
Thanks, Brady. We'll see you soon.